would be hard for anybody to understand. Why is it that we're investing so much overseas, and who cares about those people, and blah, blah, blah. We live in a globalized world, right? There are no those people. We're all one people, right? The point is, and it's a hard concept for people to understand, and I'm not going to try and even lecture on it or explain it, because I think the concept transcends. I'll just stop at that, right? It's just a hard thing to understand. There is no we, us, them people, right? It's all one people. We still are talking in this sort of archaic, United States versus Russians, United States versus Saudis, United States versus Jamaicans, all this other stuff, right? It's not, in fact, it's all one. People who really understand that it's all one, God bless them, what ends up happening is we recognize that, hey, if democracy is being threatened over there, yeah, it's true, we shouldn't just jump and save everybody else. Sometimes you're going to have to fight for yourself. Sometimes the enemy will get a little strong. Sometimes other states will be punished for having democratic and espousing democratic ideologies by terrorist groups and terrorist cells and so on. Right? The United States isn't going to intervene on all of the behalfs. The world is going to have to fight its own battle. The point is, though, the United States is going to recognize this. We're not willing to lose this particular state or not, and so on, right? Because that might significantly undermine our democratic liberties. Once the battle, and I'm not going to get into too much, but once terrorists recognize that, and actually I'm not going to, I don't want to say that, because this is a public lecture, right? And there's a significant threat to democracy to outside of the United States. I would just imagine there's going to be a substantial, significant threat because they're weaker. Right? That's just it. So I'm going to stop with that. Thus, an investment in regional stabilization reflects our values and advances our interests, right? It reflects our values and it advances our interests, right? We need to invest, the United States or some other democratic nation, need to invest in global democratization, right? Any particular democracy needs to invest in global democracy, right? So, I mean, if you think of it, right, if we're talking about a particular, like this particular, and actually I don't want to do the logic. If we're talking about, let's say we have the alphabet, right? A through Z, if I can write, right? So the total successful global liberation and liberty and democracy would be sort of this democratic world, A through Z, right? The gamut. And imagine that this is a particular, let's say this is W, right? Let's say this is a particular instance of this global, successful global liberty. What ends up happening is, in order for me to arrive at this state of affairs, the better I'm at, the better the group, all of us collectively are at arriving at democracy, is the better I am at arriving at my own instance of democracy. But the tyrant doesn't and will not and cannot allow that to happen. There's many other things that can happen, but the thing is like I can't do give a sort of terrorist, tyrannical argument for this, right? Because I don't know who's watching. I don't know who's watching these videos, and I think I've already given out probably a little bit too much analysis. But it's public stuff, and if the bureaucrats want me to stop, I'll stop. Right? We don't want to make people stronger than they need to be. So, tyranny. Who's the bad guy? Who's our enemy, right? Who's our enemy? Who is our enemy? The enemy is the tyrant. And the question is, what is tyranny, right? And why is it significant? Remember, we're talking about ideology. What is tyranny? Tyranny is the combination of brutality, poverty, and it should be enforced poverty. Tyranny is the combination of brutality, enforced poverty, instability, corruption, and suffering forged, I guess the forge captures it, forged under the rule of despots and despotic systems. It is a crime of man, not a fact of nature. The first thing to recognize, and I think I get into this when I talk, I'll get to this in a little bit when I talk about misconceptions of the causes of terrorism. I'll just jump ahead for a second. Being poor isn't a condition for terrorist activity, period. End of discussion. There's far too many poor people in the globe to say that simply because you're poor, you're going to end up being a terrorist. It's crap, right? Granted, being poor puts you in a pretty precarious position, right? You might be able to be recruited, but just the fact that you're poor doesn't mean that you're going to be a terrorist. That's just categorically false. With respect to this idea of tyranny, it is the combination of brutality, poverty, right? The combination of brutality, poverty, instability, corruption, and suffering forged under the rule of despots in a despotic system, right? The point is, you can imagine, if you will, remember we said the system, the tyrant has power localized at the top, right? So we'll just put total source of power. And you have the person at the top. And this is, to be honest with you, this is exactly what I've done a very, 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 very in-depth lecture on this. Jose Ortega y Gasset. It was the first lecture series that I did. This is what started this whole YouTube channel for me. It was my lecture series on Jose Ortega y Gasset's. And Gasset has a name for this guy, right? Gasset calls him the mass man, because he pretends to be of the masses, but he's really not. And I'll talk more about that later. So he has total source of power. He accesses total source of power. And underneath him, if you will, right, underneath him are the myriad lives of people that he's oppressing. And this is what Gasset talks about. Right, so if you want to look at this as a pyramid, the mass man is at the top of the pyramid, where power is localized, centralized, and then that power is used to oppress, and he's literally standing on sort of the backs of the masses, right? And this account that Gasset gives was prior to the rise of Adolf Hitler. He spoke about it, but then you recognize that there's going to be revolution among the masses. Now, granted, Gasset's idea of revolution is a little bit more complicated than just picking up guns and fighting the mass man, right? The way that this revolt unfolds is an ideological revolt, right? And a lot of this is, we've seen a little bit. I would say maybe the first phase, and I don't want to get into this too much because it's a different topic. Maybe the first phase of this in the revolts that we've been seeing throughout the Middle East. I think there's going to be significant more, because once the individual citizens recognize that they don't have access to power, that there's a clear distinction between them and the mass man, right? Where power is localized completely at the top, and then all the other people are impoverished by that power, then obviously they're going to want to usurp his power, and then rise to control. In order to prevent the same thing from happening again, what you need via Paulo Freire is a recognition that in political obstructionism and the shift in political paradigms, the individuals who assume power can't just reinforce the same hegemonic system. But that's a little bit more complicated than we need to get into. Right? But this is sort of the idea. The visual is one person at the top, all the power localized at the top, oppression, poverty, suffering, brutality, anything by all means necessary to keep that power at the top. What they don't want is a diffusion. You would imagine, I'm not going to do it, a diffusion of that blue like a stream, right? We need water to survive, like a diffusion of blue throughout. That's not going to happen. And without that power, without that sustenance, the population is eventually going to die, right? 4 steps then to promoting democracy. I'm not going to write this down. I think it's pretty obvious, right? The first thing is to defend human rights. The second thing is to be responsive. The government needs to be responsive to the will of the people. So obviously, human rights is like priority number 1, right? As a genocide scholar, we have to recognize the inherent humanity of all people, right? 2, responsive to the will of the people. 3, maintaining order and impartiality. And then 4, limiting government reach, right? This idea, this was canonically Adolf Hitler's sort of modus operandi, was to say, listen, we want our government to consume all, right? This idea of Lebensraum was this idea that the government becomes global, right? We're going to expand and kill and dominate until the government becomes global. And what you'll see in a second, when I get into this next half of the lecture, are the similarities between what I study, genocide, and terrorism. It's 2 totally different concepts. It's not, in no sense am I saying they're the same, but there are striking similarities. And obviously in genocide studies, genocide theorists and scholars and students understand the function that Lebensraum had for Nazi Germany, right? The state becomes global. It's not that we're attacking France, or we're attacking England, or we're attacking Spain. It's that insofar as we attack England and France and Spain and these other democracies, and even smaller democracies, that we slowly expand the reach of power, right? There's that scene in Bart Simpson where Bart tries to, I forget what he's doing, but he puts something in a socket and he gets shocked, and he's like, whoa, he does it again, he gets shocked, he does it again, he gets shocked. Like, terrorist organizations recognize that we can't just keep attacking the United States of America, right? Just keep on attacking the biggest one. We're not going anywhere. We're losing our leaders. We're losing our foothold. Those guys are willing. I mean, Hillary Clinton said it. It was actually pretty amazing. She said something like, "We're going to outlast you. We're stronger than you. We have more resources than you. We're ready to fight." Was basically what she said. You know, terrorist organizations, it's not that they're intimidated, but, you know, they recognize we can't keep doing the same thing thinking that we're going to make progress. So that the scope of their threat, the change in their threat will always be towards the United States, but it has to focus to smaller states, right? And that means a lot of people outside of the United States are now going to be targets, right? I mean, again, I hate having to think like that, but you got to think like that in order to be able to do what I do for a living. So anyway, yeah. All right. So we recognize what we need to do to promote democracy. And then the next thing that I want to discuss in the next section is a discussion of sort of really looking at the ideology of terrorism in its fullest and an understanding of how it functions. So I will continue that discussion next time. With that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Thanks, and have a good day.